Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Asi Penpalisa, and I am from the Center for Postgraduate Studies. Welcome, and thank you very much for engaging with us. Also on our social media platforms, we are available on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. We are actually live streaming this session today on YouTube. So if you want the recording, you will get it on our YouTube page and many other engagements that we have posted on our YouTube. Thank you very much. So today we are having a session on how to analyze a journal article, on how to read, on how to code a journal article. And joining us today is the director of the Center for Postgraduate Studies. But as she's sharing her screen, I'd like to remind you all to please keep your videos off as well as your mics. She will indicate when she is ready for Q&A or any other conversation. Then you can utilize your mics by unmuting and your videos as well so we can see your faces. We will also post a link of evaluation so that you can evaluate our workshops as well as this workshop today. We will continue posting the link so that you can actually do the evaluation as we are continuing with this workshop. And lastly, we will post the YouTube link so that you can share on your social media with anyone who would like to join this session on YouTube. Thank you very much. And joining us today to do the analysis of a journal article is Soma Kena, who is the director of the Center for Postgraduate Studies. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Asipe. So this is being live streamed. That's I feel like I'm being dragged into the 21st century. That's what happens when old people work with young people. And it really is my incredible joy and privilege to work with the team that I work with, because they are not only wonderful people, but they are so much more tech savvy than I am. And I really appreciate you guys. So today we're going to look at how one can analyze a journal article as postgraduate scholars. I'm actually going to turn off my camera so that it uses less bandwidth. Now that you've seen who I am. As postgraduate scholars, a large portion of your work is reading your way into the field. And I think this is often not sufficiently understood and perhaps not sufficiently scaffolded in our undergraduate years. Because when you are a postgraduate scholar, you are making a contribution at the frontiers of a field. And so you really need to have a good sense of where the frontiers of your field are. What are the up-to-date conversations, the current deliberations, the main concepts, the most up-to-date methodologies? What are other people who are working in the same area doing and thinking? You don't have to agree with them, but you need to know. I think many postgraduate students rush to the more hands-on practical aspect of an empirical study. They want to collect the data, analyze the data, get into the laboratory, get out into the field. And that, of course, is hugely important because most of you are doing empirical studies where you will actually collect and analyze data in order to reach findings. But remember, those findings need to be at the frontiers of a field. So rushing to collect the data and to do the experiments and to go into the field and collect your samples, whatever it might be, is a crucial but really only part of a postgraduate study. It's really important that right from the beginning of your postgraduate studies, you start reading and you keep reading. And I think we don't make this clear enough, that it's through reading that you can join the conversation. It's through reading that you can make that contribution. So I know that in the natural sciences, people often, if they write their time frame for their studies, they'll, have all the usual things: proposal, ethical clearance, data collection, data analysis, and then somewhere at the end, it'll say writing up. And that's fine because for all of us, regardless of what faculty you're in, what kind of study you're doing, there's that intense period where you do very serious writing up at the end. But it's important that none of you are under the conception that the reading and writing can happen at the end. The reading and writing needs to happen all the way through, even if most of the early days is just you reading and thinking, what the hell is this article about? I don't understand any of it. And most of your writing is garbled, gobbledygook as you scribble notes to yourself and try to figure out what this is all about. That's absolutely fine if most of your reading and writing is very messy, very confused, going around in circles. For the first part of your study, that is completely normal, so don't panic, but it needs to be happening, and it needs to be happening on a regular basis, because you build up those intellectual muscles and the reading and writing practices by doing it all the way along. So that's my first point I really want to emphasize today, is that most of the hours that you spend on your postgraduate study, or great many of those hours, need to be spent working your way into the field, coming to understand what others in the field are doing and thinking. And this entails a hell of a lot of reading. The next thing I want to say is for all the honors students who might be with us today, and that is to just really emphasize something that might not have been that clear to you up till now. And that is that once you're at postgraduate level, you are working with academic texts. At undergraduate level, you'll often be working with teaching texts. So teaching texts are things like course guides, lecture notes, and textbooks. And textbooks are very important teaching and learning texts, and they're the way that you come to grips with the foundational concepts and knowledge in your field, but they are not academic texts. They're written in a completely different style and genre. So if in your undergraduate years, you have only ever been exposed to teaching and learning texts, I hope that's not the case, but if it is the case that you've only ever read teaching and learning texts like textbooks and course guides and so on, you need to really take note that now that you're at postgraduate level, you are reading academic texts, texts written by researchers for researchers, because you are now a novice researcher. You are now joining the field, not as a student, but as a researcher. And so you're no longer reading textbooks or Wikipedia pages. I'm not saying you won't be reading them, by the way. I still often go to Wikipedia or textbooks if I want to get a quick, easy, basic understanding of something. But to really understand to understand the field so that I'm prepared to make my own contribution, I need to be reading researcher texts, academic texts written by researchers for researchers. And these are academic books, that is not textbooks, and academic journal articles. And I think often this is not made clear to students, that these are different texts. It's a different genre. It follows different rules. And those are the ones you need to be reading more and more of at postgraduate level, because you are a researcher. So you need to read what the other researchers in your field have been saying and doing. Basically, at undergraduate level, you are, as Bartholomew says, a knowledge teller. Most of undergraduate education, not all of it, thankfully, but most of it is about coming to understand the knowledge that exists in the field as explained through textbooks and so on, and then telling it back through your assignments and your essays to show that you've understood the knowledge for yourself. So it's telling the knowledge that exists outside of you. But at postgraduate level, you are no longer knowledge tellers, you are knowledge creators. You are in the field participating in the conversation that the other more experienced researchers are having. And that conversation is primarily to be found in academic texts, including the journal article. So that's the first sort of introductory comments that I wanted to make, is to think of your identity as a researcher, albeit a very novice one, maybe a very timid one, maybe a very scared one, maybe a very confused one. Those are all completely normal, but nonetheless, you are a researcher, and to realize that the text you're engaging with are academic texts, not the teaching and learning texts that you engage with at undergraduate level. These are academic texts. These are researchers talking to researchers. A few other preliminary comments I want to make before I jump into the activity of today is to really stress to you that most of the reading you do is reading for meaning, to try and figure out, what is this dude talking about? What's going on in this study? What does this study have to do with my own research? This is the main reason why you do readings. Today we're going to be doing a slightly different kind of reading. It's called a meta level reading, and I'll come on to that later. But let me start off by this idea that most of the time you need to be reading and reading for meaning. I strongly recommend, and my own PhD students will all know that I say this over and over again, that you need to keep a reading journal. There is a video about how to keep a reading journal on the postgraduate orientation course. If you have not yet enrolled on the postgraduate orientation course on Are You Connected, please do so. It's a self-enrollment, and there's a wealth of material on that postgraduate orientation course on how to become a really proficient researcher. A lot of them, as with all videos, you've got to kind of find the time and energy to watch the video, and then you've got to find the discipline to try and put into practice some of the things recommended in the video. But I really urge you to spend some time in that orientation course, and you will find there that there is a video on how to keep a reading journal. So I won't repeat that here, other than to say a reading journal is for your own eyes, and it's where you scribble your own notes about what you've just read. So I say to my own students, for every reading, there must be a writing. If you read an article, you need to write some notes for yourself. It's for your own eyes, doesn't have to be in fancy academic language, doesn't have to be in English, doesn't have to be coherent, could be pictures and doodles and mind maps. The idea is that you do a lot of writing as you're doing reading, and in those notes for yourself, you would say, this is what I've just read. I think this part's important. I didn't understand that part. Maybe I must speak to my supervisor about this part. And very importantly, this is how this reading connects to my planned study. So really your relationship to text has changed. You're not reading a text to say, do I understand this well enough to use it in my assignment or to explain it in my exam? Now you're saying, what is this researcher saying about this topic? Is it pertinent to me? Will it be helpful to me? Does it relate to my study? Your relationship to a text is not as someone trying to learn from it. It is someone trying to see how that text can help you in your study. So you're reading it as a novice researcher, joining a conversation that is already existing in the texts written by other researchers. Right, but as I said, for today, what we're going to be doing is not reading for meaning. I'm hoping that all of you have got a journal article available from on your topic. If you haven't, don't fear, you can still work along with us. But what I want to do with you is rather quickly go through a set of exercises where you would take an article or 2 articles or 3 articles, if you like, on your topic and do what's called a meta level reading. So it's not what it says on this slide, which is reading for meaning, which is what you will always be doing. But it's more to try and crack the code of how a journal article is put together, which I hope will help you to read journal articles better. And by the way, will also help you to develop your own academic writing and potentially even to write your own journal articles. So if you've got a journal article on your topic, we will be referring to that in this session, but preferably an article you've actually read before. So you've already read it for meaning, you know what the article's about, and now we're going to go through a set of exercises on kind of unpicking that article to see how it's put together. And I'm going to go through it in an hour, which is much shorter than this workshop actually requires. I used to run this workshop in person over a full day. So I'm going to sort of take you through the steps and give you a few minutes maybe to try out the exercises using your own article from your field that you've chosen. But I would urge you to maybe just make some notes and to go through this in more detail and more slowly, or to use a different article and do it again tomorrow, because in doing this a few times, this forensic analysis, this taking an article apart, I think you will find that it really improves your reading and your writing. So let's get cracking. The first thing I want you to look at is the journal article's title. So if you can look at the title of your article and let's have a look at it. What do you think about it? I'm going to ask you in a minute to either put up your hand to share your journal article title with us or to put it into the chat bar. But for now, I want you to just have a look at your journal article and look at the title and have a look at what information it provides. What is it? Is it clear? Does it tell you that you know exactly what the topic is? Does it give you a clear sense just from that title what is going to be covered and possibly what is not covered in the article? Because a title should be very clear to the reader what the article is about. Of course, these are academic texts, so they will have a lot of specialized knowledge because these are researchers talking to other researchers in their field. So if I read the title of an article in chemistry or the title of an article in medicine, probably there are going to be some words I don't understand. That's because I'm not a researcher in that field. But for someone who's in the field, like yourself, does it make sense? Is it clear? In some fields, especially in the social sciences, there's often what's called a hook, which is a kind of a catchy phrase that might make it seem more interesting. It might be a data quote from one of the study participants. It might be a rhetorical question. In many other fields, you definitely wouldn't have a hook, some kind of clever statement that lures the reader in. In most of the natural sciences, the titles are typically very much just information, just explaining what the title is, what the article is about. I'm going to pause there for a minute and see whether anyone is brave enough to either type their title into the chat bar or to put up their hand and to tell us the title of their article. And let's have a little think about whether we think it's a good title, whether it does what we would want a title to do. Let us see who will be the brave soul to get us going. Yay, everywhere. Thank you so much. Do you want to unmute yourself and share?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. Maybe a little bit louder if you can.
Okay, am I clear now?
That's perfect.
All right, so my title is Sexual Violence and Sexuality. And should I say my
So what is the
topic?
title? You can just tell us the title of the article.
It's Sexual Violence and Sexuality.
Is that the whole title?
Yes.
Okay, so it's very clear what the topic is about, but it's not that precise. I would guess, it's not my field, but I would imagine that sexual violence and sexuality is a huge field with lots of sub-conversations. And I wonder if this article is going to be a very overarching one. I would guess from that title, it's going to be a very overarching article that introduces us to the big debates about sexuality and what did you say? Gender-based violence? No? Just remind me. What was the exact wording?
Sexual violence and sexuality.
Sexual violence and sexuality. That title makes me think it's going to be a big overarching article that's going to give you an introduction to all those issues. If it was a more focused study that looks at a very specific issue, I would expect the title to reflect that. Thanks for sharing that, Aviwe. And I see a few others have shared in the chat bar. So I'm going to quickly look at a couple of these and then we will move on to the next section. So Moniza says geomagnetic quiet day selection. Wow, well, that's not my field, so I'm just totally confused by that title, but because I don't understand anything about geomagnetics, but I'm fascinated by the term quiet day selection, which to me seems like something you would expect in the social sciences. Moniza, I wonder if you would be willing to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about that topic.
Oh, yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
It's actually about the methodology or different ways to select a geomagnetic quiet day based on different magnetic field parameters or solar wind parameters. So it's based on things like that.
Okay, so it is a day in which there is not that much, it's geomagnetically quiet.
Yes.
So the term geomagnetic quiet day is a term in the field meaning a day that doesn't have a whole lot of geomagnetic stuff going on. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm learning as we go.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Then another one, Samara's got mechanisms of insulin action and insulin resistance. Again, a nice clear title, very much like Aviwa's one. But like Aviwa's one, I wonder, it's quite broad, mechanisms of insulin action and insulin resistance, presumably that there's a whole lot of books and articles that are already about that. So I would expect a title like that. It's presumably about it's an overarching article that it's introducing that gives us an overview of the whole field. If in fact it isn't, if this is an article about a very specific insulin action or a specific insulin resistance mechanism, I would have expected the title to be more precise. Ingrid's talking about Williams rethinking learning in higher education. Again, a broad title, but again, quite engaging. Rethinking learning. Okay, so it's not just all the other stuff we've got about learning in higher education. This is going to make us rethink. So it's quite nice and catchy. Voice has got water security in Africa in the age of global climate change. Again, quite a broad title, very nice. So lots of interesting examples here. Mhlali says, computational thinking in education, where does it fit? A systematic literature review. Now that's a particularly interesting title to me because it does three things. Firstly, it tells you the topic. It's about computational thinking in education. Secondly, it asks a provocative question, a rhetorical question. Where does it fit? That's the hook, where you're going to say, oh, it's about computational thinking in education. Oh, this is going to be about where it actually fits in. And then it actually tells you the methodology, which is unusual in a title, that it tells you what the methodology, but not unheard of. And the methodology in this case is a systematic literature review. So this article is a review that's been systematically done of the literature. Tony's got a very specific one, trauma and resilience in journalism, exploring PTSD and post-traumatic growth amongst South African journalists. Very precise, very clear, and the kind of title you would expect to see of a journal article that not only tells you the topic, but the very specific aspect of that topic that you'd see. Taimi, I apologize to everybody if I'm butchering any of your names. Taimi speaks about the title is Artificial Intelligence in Education. Can AI bring full potential to personalized learning in education? I wonder if you need I wonder if that first half is needed, given the second half basically says the same thing. And then, wow, Jan or Jan, I'm going to assume it's Jan. This is where my complete ignorance becomes crashingly obvious. Speciation of ruthenium chlorocomplexes in HCl solutions and their extraction characteristics with an amide containing anime, not anime compound. Very specific, very clear to those who are in the field. They would know exactly what this article is about. Okay, I'm going to leave that at this stage. Thank you so much. Oh, Amin. Thank you so much to all those that have shared their titles. That was very interesting. And of course, it doesn't mean that that any of these titles were right or wrong. I'm just giving you some comments of the kinds of things you could look for in titles. And I see Temba Beloy. What a blinking cheek, Temba. Temba's put the title of one of my own articles on here. He's obviously having a good laugh there. Crossing conceptual thresholds in doctoral communities. So that's the title of an article that I wrote. Conceptual thresholds is the theory that I used. Okay, thank you very much for that. So what I'm suggesting is that you take a few articles in your field, have a look at the way the titles are put together, because it's only by cross-checking a few different titles on your topic that you start to get a feeling for how titles are put together, what titles indicate, and that will help you not only read them better, but help you to be able to write your own articles. Let's move on to the next part of the article, and that is the abstract. So the abstract will look different in different fields, and that is a very important point that I should make when I'm throughout today's session, is that there isn't one kind of journal article. A physics journal article looks fundamentally different to a mathematics journal article, which looks fundamentally different to a social anthropology article, which looks fundamentally different to a psychology article, and so on and so forth. So the point is that I can't teach you the menu, the formula that you can just follow to either understand an article or to write your own. You really need to immerse yourself in your field to get a sense for how journal articles are made in your field. I should have said that as one of my original starting comments. Nonetheless, almost every field and almost every journal will expect a journal article to begin with an abstract. Now, what is an abstract? Well, an abstract, it serves a number of really important functions. Firstly, it acts as a summary of the whole text. So an abstract is not like the blurb that you find on the back of a novel that sort of gives you a little hint of what the novel's about and tries to make you buy it, but doesn't actually tell you what happens. An abstract is not like that. It's not a murder mystery. It tells you the whole story. There shouldn't be anything, any major part of the article that is not in the abstract. The abstract must tell you the major findings. It must tell you the clear contribution of the article. It should sum up the whole article. That's really important. And this is important because many people will make the decision whether or not to read your article based on reading the abstract. In fact, one of the things I recommend to my own PhD students is don't just do a search on whatever database you're looking for journal articles and just download on the basis of the title or the basis of your keyword search, and then think that you've done a lot of work because you downloaded 75 articles or whatever it might be. You must force yourself to open the article and read the abstract before you download it. So that you're a bit more discerning about what you download, and so that you're actually getting into the process of reading as you are selecting your texts. So your abstract is very important in terms of helping your reader to decide which articles to read further. Very experienced researchers who are reading a heck of a lot of texts all the time to keep up to date with the field will always skim read the abstract before they decide whether or not to read the article. So it really needs to have the core information. Another reason it's important is a rather sad one, and that is that thanks to the injustices of the academic publishing industry, many academics around the world, particularly in the global south, will only have access to the abstracts. If the article is not open access, many articles on databases belonging to journals that charge a fortune for anyone to access those articles, only the abstract is freely available. And so it's really important for people who are not in a privileged institution like Rhodes University, where our library subscribes to so many wonderful databases. You need to think about the fact that in many countries and many universities, even in South Africa, the access will be to the abstract. So either they'll only read the abstract and they need to understand your study, or they have to make a decision, a big financial decision on the basis of that abstract, whether or not to request the full article. So abstracts are definitely important. Another reason abstracts are important, and I keep finding myself changing who I'm talking to. On the one hand, I'm talking to you as novice researchers who are needing to understand how to read articles, but I'm also talking to you as novice researchers who will be writing articles in the future. And so as novice researchers who will be writing articles in the future, I should warn you that most editors, when you submit an article for consideration for publication, most editors will only read the abstract. I know, speaking from personal experience here, I read the abstract and decide on that basis whether or not to send it to review. I don't have time to read sometimes I might skim read a bit of an article if I'm not clear from the abstract and something looks promising, but it's not exactly clear. But if the abstract's a mess or not clear or seems to be off topic, it's on the basis of that abstract that I do a desk rejection. I don't want to waste my reviewer's time looking at articles that I know are not going to be good enough for the journal. And I don't have time to read every article that gets sent to me. So it's on the basis of the abstract that I make that decision. So you do want to get your abstract right. Now, abstracts look very different in different fields, but Kamler and Thompson offer quite a nice little formula to consider and to use possibly to write your own abstracts. And I'm going to ask you to open an article, not one written by yourself, but an article written by someone else on your topic, and to have a look at the abstract and to see whether you can see these 4 sections. So Kamler and Thompson suggest that not every, but most abstracts will have these 4 sections, and usually, but not always, in this order. So the first section is locate. So that locate is the bigger problem area, the bigger area in which the study in this journal article is positioned. So that starts off by telling the reader, this is the big problem. We all know this is the big area of research. We all know this is a big issue. This is the conversation that this article engages with. This is the prior sort of research, the big topic. So that is locate. But then after you've located, you would focus within this big problem area. This is the specific area, the specific subsection, the specific question or issue that this article tackles. So locate is the big issue, focus is the specific issue, then report. Report is, what did you do? A systematic literature review using these databases, using these keywords, or interviews with these people analyzed using this framework, or this experiment using this these samples using this technology. So that's report. Tell us what you did, summarize your main sort of research design. And then the fourth part, in the research design, what did you find? So it's the whole story of your empirical study, assuming it's an empirical study. And then finally, argument. What is the contribution? What do you want the reader to remember or to have learnt from your article? What is your take-home message? I'll come back to the idea of argument, which is so central to all journal articles, whether you're reading them or whether you're writing them. Every journal article needs to make a clear contribution, a clear argument. It can't just be a lovely report on a piece of research that you did. That's great to tell your supervisor or your funder or whatever, but that's not a contribution to knowledge. Just telling us what you did, that's lovely for you, but quite frankly, the field doesn't care. The field cares about what you're teaching us, what you're helping us to learn. So you need to be very clear, what is the argument? And this argument, I'll speak about it a bit more later, but this argument is in the abstract. So what is you can call it argument. Argument can be a bit of a confusing word because we also have the word argument in English, which is where you argue with people, you disagree, you fight. It doesn't mean that in academic language. In academic language, argument means to take a position. So you're arguing something. You've taken a position and you're trying to convince your readers of this position. It's your contribution. It's, dear reader, this is what you're going to learn from this article. So the abstract typically, but not always, has these 4 parts: locate, focus, report, and argue. And if we just have a quick look at an article, I've just chosen an example here. It's called Life at the Top, Rank and Stress in Male Baboons. It's written by some colleagues of mine. You can see there that they've got what I called a hook in the title, Life at the Top. So that's like a little catchphrase that seems quite interesting and hooks you in. And then the second half is very clear. What's it actually about? It's about rank and stress in wild male baboons. Let's have a look at that abstract. And here it is. In social hierarchies, dominant individuals experience reproductive and health benefits, but the cost of social dominance remains a topic of debate. So there you've got the locate. This is the big issue that this article is about. Then it goes on to say, prevailing hypotheses predict that higher ranking males experience higher testosterone and glucocorticoid stress hormone levels than lower ranking males when hierarchies are unstable, but not otherwise. So there we're really focusing in on what the specific aspect on dominance in social dominance of these higher ranking males. So the first sentence is locating in the problem, the second sentence is focusing in. Then it goes on to say, in this long-term study of rank-related stress in natural population of savanna baboons, high-ranking males had higher testosterone and lower glucocorticoid levels than other males, regardless of hierarchy stability. The singular exception was the highest-ranking alpha males who exhibited both high testosterone and high glucocorticoid levels. So there we have very clear reporting. This is what we did. It's a long-term study. We tested the testosterone and glucocorticoid levels. This is what we found. So that's the report section. And then the last sentence, in particular, alpha males exhibited much higher stress hormone levels than second-ranking beta males, suggesting that being at the very top may be more costly than previously thought. That's the argument. That's the contribution. That's what they want to say. When you've read this whole article, this is what you're going to understand. So there is a perfect example of an article. You can see I've tried to scribble over to show you the different sections. That starts with locate in yellow, focus in orange, report in the pink, and then underlined in the green is the argument. Not all abstracts are going to follow this exact formula, but what I'd like you to do is to spend I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to have a look at your own at an article that you have in front of you. I'll leave this slide on the screen, and I'm just going to be quiet for 5 minutes and ask you to move between this slide, which shows you the 4 stages, and the example of an article in your field. See if the abstract does more or less what Kamala and Thompson suggest is the most common formula for an abstract. I'll give you 5 minutes. I am aware of the dead air and of the fact that not all of you have an article in front of you. So this is when I really miss doing this face-to-face, because I could walk around and have a look at your abstracts with you. But I wonder if there is anyone who is willing to just tell us, did you notice anything interesting? Have you got any comments on this particular aspect, this suggestion that most abstracts attempt to do this? Anyone want to share a comment? Just put up your hand and let's discuss this for a minute or two. And while you summon up the courage or think what you'd like to share about this aspect, I wonder if I can ask Olwetu, can you do that? Thanks, Olwetu. Just before I ask a few of you to share your views, I should note something that a lot of novice researchers, when they're writing their first couple of journal articles, they will often jump to the report and they'll jump to the focus and report, and they will omit the first and the fourth section. So they don't kind of first contextualize, here's a big problem, which is really important because it immediately tells us why we should be interested in this article. Instead, what they do is jump straight to focusing on themselves and their study. This is what this study is about. This is what I did, and this is what I found. So they don't kind of lure us in by contextualizing it with a big argument. And they also don't, and this is the most important part, they don't necessarily tell us, so what? Which is the argument part. So what? So you did this study, this is what you found. What must I learn from this? Why is this important for me as a reader, a fellow researcher in the field? What will the take-home message for me be? What is the contribution? So it's really important to have that locate and argument section. But having said that, of course, many abstracts work in different ways. And Kamler and Thompson themselves admit that often locate and focus might be in the same sentence, might even be in a different order. But you definitely want to include the argument there. Anyone got any comments about that, about their reading of their abstract of the journal article that they're looking at? Any brave souls? What is Tembeletu? Can you just say you can soft copy documents? Just tell me what you're meaning there. I think I'm missing your point there. I wonder if you would mind unmuting yourself, Tembeletu. Just want to make sure I get you properly. You say in the chat bar, you can soft copy documents analyzing journal article. Yes. You can share. Yeah, you can share. If you would like to share a journal article abstract. Oh, I thought I'd left in another abstract, but I didn't. Oh, I did. Here's another example of an abstract, just to show you how they do look different in different fields. Here they've this abstract in this field, and it's quite common in the medical field, has very specific subsections. Here's the background, which I guess you could argue is the locate, the big problem. Then the methods is the reporting, and the results, reporting, and the conclusion is your argument. This is what we need you to know. We need you to know, after you've read this whole study, that cervical cancer patients experience several financial challenges. Only a few of them had insurance cover, which catered for only bed. There's a need for Kenyan healthcare system to develop mechanisms for provision of financial support for cervical cancer patients. So that's clearly the lesson that they want their readers to understand and to find credible and to believe after they have followed the whole study. Okay, and Tony also had an article that had these subsections. So those subsections, it doesn't mean that those other four phases are not there. Oops. They are there, but they might just be arranged slightly differently because the journal expects the abstract to follow particular subsections. Right, and then we move on. And the next part of the journal article is the introduction. And just speaking to you as novice researchers who will in the future be writing your own articles, let me just give you some advice. Write it last. Oh, Aviwe, your hand is up. Let's hear from you.
Yeah. Is it possible because I have an abstract here in front of me. So I want to know if it's possible for the focus and the location to like you find that in one sentence.
Yes, it is very possible that locate and focus come together. Do you want to read us that sentence?
Because with this one that's saying sexual violence and sexuality, on the abstract, the first sentence is pornography looks like becoming as contentious an issue within the women's movement in Britain as it has been in America. And I think that's the focus for this.
Yeah. Oh, who's doing the max? Thanks. If someone can just, you don't, can you, it's Boy to Mellow. Maybe you can make me a co-host as well. Please, Olwe too. Just waiting to be made co-host and then I'll deal with the noise. Okay, you can unmute yourself again, Aviwe. So yes, I think the example you've given us seems to be the focus, and maybe it hasn't. It might be both because it starts off with saying pornography is a contentious issue in the women's movement. I guess that's the big problem, and then it focuses in on saying in the UK as much as it has been in America. So I guess that one sentence does both. I'm going to have a look at the example that Tony has given us in the chat bar. And Tony gives us an example exactly like the one I just shared, which has subsections. So motivation, I guess that's the is the broader location. You know, where is this whole thing? And the research purpose, I guess, is also location, perhaps. And then, or maybe the research purpose is more honing in on the specific aspect. Then you've got research design and main findings. So that's reporting. And then contribution, value add. And then practical and managerial implications. I guess those last two are both saying, dear reader, this is what you're going to learn from this article. This is what your take-home message is. This is what needs to be done. So it's very much the so what part is in those last two sections. Right, we are going to move on to the introduction. The introduction of an article, again, I can't tell you what it looks like because it looks so different in different fields. The style of language, the style of writing, the words used, the length of the sentence, everything varies by discipline. So when people tell you, you know, journal article writing as if it's one thing, it's not one thing. It differs by journal, it differs by field, it differs by topic. So that's why doing this exercise a few times on your own is really useful because you'll come to understand how journal articles are constructed in your field and not in some generic way, which is all I can really speak to is the more generic. But I'm hopefully alerting you to the need to understand it in your field. So the introduction is, like every other part, going to look very different if you had articles from different fields. But if you were the writer and you were writing your own article, I reckon it's really important to know that the introduction, you would generally write last. The introduction and the conclusion, you would write last. So I'd typically start with introduction and I write a note to myself, write the introduction here. And I might put a few bullets of things that I want to remind myself to include in the introduction. But because the introduction is introducing the article, you can't write it until you really have got a fairly final, not the final, but a fairly established body and conclusion of the article. How do you introduce a person that you don't know? That's the exact same thing with writing an introduction. You're introducing the reader to your article. But if you don't yet know what the structure of the article is going to be, how you're going to write it, how you're going to craft it, what are your main findings, you know, all that stuff. What is the main argument? You kind of have to do a lot of drafting and redrafting of the body to really get a clear sense of what the structure and the argument is going to be. And so your introduction should introduce the reader to that. You can't write that until you know what that's all about. So you leave that till the end. Importantly, your reader should be drawn in, and it should describe the problem. So in a way, this is the locate and the focus of the abstract fleshed out. It tells you, it makes a case for the whole article, that there is this problem. Here is the context. Those are the kinds of things that are often drawing the reader in by describing the issue. When we say problem, that's another difficult word, because there's a word problem in English and there's a word problem in academic writing. Problem in English always means, oh, this is bad. Whereas the problem in academic writing can be, this is bad, but it can also just be problem in the sense of the specific topic that you are interrogating. And it might not be a problematic thing. For example, you could have as your problem the improvements in water management in Makanda. Or wouldn't that be nice? Let's say that water management suddenly is much better in Makanda, and you're doing a study on what led to the improvements. Now, that's not a problem, right? That's a good thing. But it's still the problem of your study. So again, that word problem is a bit of a problem. Sometimes the introduction also outlines the structure of the article that can be written in quite a boring way. And yeah, it can say, the article begins with the literature review and then moves on to report on the methods before explaining the key findings. And okay, fine, that's boring. And probably unnecessary, because the example I just gave is very standard article structure. So if you're going to include the outline of a structure, make sure that it tells me something interesting. But sometimes that's really important. I actually reviewed an article this morning that it wasn't clear to me from the introduction whether this was a literature review or whether it was an empirical study, and it was only quite towards the end that I realized that it was a literature review on the basis of which she was developing a model. Nowhere in the introduction or the abstract had told me that. So I kept reading literature, and I was like on page 13, 14, 15, and I thought, well, I haven't even got to the methods yet. And then suddenly there was this model. So as a reader, I didn't feel prepared. I should have in the introduction had been prepared a bit, that this article offers a literature review on the following key concepts in order to present a model which will allow teachers to do whatever. Okay, so at this point in the workshop, I would ask you to have a look at the introductions in the articles in your own topic. But again, so that we don't have dead air online, I'm going to ask you to do that later. But I would like you to perhaps have a quick look at the introductions, so that if there are any questions or comments about the introductions in the articles in front of you, then we can address those. But I do urge you to this evening or tomorrow to sit with 2 or 3 articles on your topic and force yourself to go through this process in a more slow manner, because I think it will be useful. But do any of you have any off-the-cuff comments about the introduction, or questions? If you would like to ask me them, I am happy to take any questions or comments about the introduction now. Yes, Mhlali.
Yes, Prof. I'm not sure whether I'm following you or not when you're saying that we should leave it, the introduction, write it last. And I think you also, talked a bit on this. How can we write it last if I'm to, present what I'm writing about? Shouldn't it be the first thing that I write, that, okay, the introduction is, introduce my research, this is what is happening and all that, up until the very last point where you say that you need to outline that the rest of the article, the outline of the and structure of the article. So I'm a bit confused as to when actually do we have to write the introduction, or what actually needs to be in the introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mhlali. I think, look, I think different people have different writing habits and writing styles. But what I think is really important to know is that if you were sitting down and writing an article for possible publication, firstly, the research needs to be finished. You need to have the contribution clear in your head, or at least that part of the research that you're going to be writing about needs to be finished, because many people publish during their PhD. But each publication, you are offering a contribution to the reader. So you need to be clear what part of your study are you writing about? What is the contribution? And when I say contribution, you could use the word contribution, key message, take-home message, argument, whatever you like. So that needs to be clear. You then draft the article. You don't sit down and write a perfect article. You sit down and write a messy ideas, rewrite it, rework it, edit, rewrite. You can't just sit down and start writing a text from the first word to the last word. That's not how academic writing happens. You need to first know what is your key argument. Then you need to start crafting it. And whether you craft that through drawing a mind map for yourself first, or whether you just start writing. I like to just start writing, but I don't try and write beautifully. I write just to put it down on paper, because I just get it down on paper, and then I start to think, hang on, this part of the argument needs to go earlier. Oh, hang on, my reader needs to have this explained back there. And then I move things around. So if the introduction of an article is meant to describe the big problem and welcome the reader to the article and tell the reader what the article does and what structure it follows, it's quite hard to write that when you haven't done all the other work first. You need to, so when you're drafting it, I just find, and I think this is good advice, that to try and write a beautiful introduction of an article that is not yet written is very difficult, because an introduction says XYZ is a major problem in this particular context. It needs to be addressed. In this study, I look at the literature on these key concepts, and I note that there hasn't been research done in this area. And therefore, in this article, I present you with a study that I undertook in this way, and blah, blah, blah. So it's really hard to tell your readers what the article is all about if you haven't written it yet. So obviously you have to write it at some stage. I just recommend that if you sit down and you try and write a perfect introduction before you've even drafted the article, you're going to spend a long time trying to get the perfect introduction. Whereas actually, if you drafted the article and redrafted until you're fairly happy with it, and then try and write the introduction, you'll find it much easier to write the introduction then. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, let us move on to this next. Oh, I think this is an introduction that I was just going to share with you. So what you can see here is an introduction that starts off by sort of making the big field. It locates it within the broader area. It gives you a brief overview of the specific issue that this article will tackle. What's interesting to note here is that the article, I'm trying to find my spotlight. There we go. Sorry, everyone. Apologies. I'm now, suddenly my computer has decided that this is a very good time to start trying to do updates. No, computer, it is not a good time. What you can see here is that, okay, let me get a pen. Is that there are lots of references in this introduction. Not all fields will do that. Not all disciplines include references in the introduction. In many fields of the harder end of the natural sciences, all the references are to be found in the literature review. It's only in the literature review that you get the overview of all the discussions in the literature. You get a kind of mapping out of the field. The introduction doesn't usually have any references. The methods doesn't usually have any references. The findings doesn't usually have any references. The discussion and conclusion doesn't usually have any references. Whereas in other fields, particularly in the softer end of the social sciences, such as in my own field, we have references in the introduction, we have references in the literature review, we have references in the methods section, we have references in the findings, we have references in the conclusion. And it's because of the different nature of knowledge. In the hard sciences, there's often generally agreement about, for example, the methods. So I don't need to give you references to substantiate why I used a particular technique or particular machinery or particular measurement. I can just report that I did that. Whereas in my field, in higher education studies, in the methods section, there isn't general agreement. So if I explain that I did interviews, I need to justify why did I choose to do interviews when I could have done a focus group or I could have done a questionnaire. So I use some of the references to the literature on interviews to substantiate my judgment, my choice to use a particular method. And because the nature of the findings are often more contested, I don't just report on those findings in a very matter-of-fact reporting objective way, as I might do in some fields of the natural sciences. Instead, in some fields of the social sciences, I include references to the literature as I'm discussing my findings from my own data to show how my data speaks to the conversations in the field. So it's important to see that the ways in which references is used is different, and that's what you can see here. But again, there's no clear rule. I can't tell you that, oh, in geography you do it like this, or in environmental science you do it like that, because actually the way in which references are used can vary within subfields of a discipline and can vary even from journal to journal. So we can talk more about that in another workshop on choosing the journal for your publication. But what you can certainly see in this example is that a lot of references are to be found in the introduction, and you might not find that in every field. Right, the next part I want to raise, the next issue I want to raise is probably the most important, and the one that you are not going to be able to do much of now because of the nature of this workshop, but the one that I want to make very sure you all understand. So if you don't understand when I'm finished talking about this, please, please, please ask questions. I'm happy to explain it again or to say it in a different way. To try and make it make sense, because I'm such a strong believer that figuring this out is fundamental to cracking the code of both reading journal articles and writing journal articles. What this is all about is about how the argument is built. And this will look different in different fields. So you need to take a couple of journal articles that you're using in your own study on the same topic and try and repeat this activity a few times. I promise you the time you invest in this activity will pay good dividends, both in helping you to read journal articles better and helping you to write journal articles better. Basically, this is what I want to say. Every journal article is an argument. As I said earlier, argument doesn't mean you're fighting. It means you're taking a position and providing sufficient evidence for it that your readers will be convinced of that position. So you need to be able to identify for yourself as the writer and for yourself as the reader, what is the main argument of this article? Now, we've already seen you'll find it in the abstract. You'll often find it in the introduction. And then the whole body of the article is providing steps along the way to convince you as the reader of that contribution, that argument. Each article makes one, there's various ways literature calls these different things, but each article makes one. Some of the literature calls it contribution to knowledge. Some of the literature calls it an argument. Some of the literature calls it a take-home message, whatever you want to call it. Each article will have something that it's a gift that you're giving the reader, that throughout the whole article, you're providing the evidence for it. But in order to make your reader convinced of this position, this contribution, this take-home message, whatever you call it, you need to provide us with very careful evidence. So you can't just state the argument and say, well, that's what I believe, or in my opinion, because sadly, that doesn't hack it in academic writing. It's fine at a party or a bar to say, well, in my view, or I think, or I believe. But in an academic article, we need to build this argument through this chain. Think of it as a necklace around your neck where each link has to connect to each other so that all the little parts, all the sentences of your article, each of the paragraphs of your article, each of the subsections of your article kind of need to flow and link together to build this one convincing argument. And these chains are claims made by the author of the article with evidence, because the evidence cannot just be, I think, I believe. The evidence needs to be something that carries academic credibility. So you can make a claim as an author, or if you're reading, you'll see that the author makes a claim. They say something is true. They say it as if it's a fact. But why should you believe it as a reader? They need to give you evidence. So the evidence will be in two different forms. Typically, there are a few exceptions to this, but most of the time, 99% of the time, authors make a claim, and either that claim is a generally accepted claim that can just be stated, like E equals MC squared, or 1 + 1 = 2, or rain falls out the sky. So sometimes you can make claims as an author because it's generally accepted. Everyone in the field knows this. You can just state it. But 99% of the time you make a claim, your reader will say, really? Says who? And you've got to give us some evidence. And that evidence will take one of two forms. Either it will be evidence in the form of a reference. So you make a claim and then you give us a reference to show us that other people in the field in good, strong, credible, peer-reviewed articles have supported the claim that you're making, have also said something similar, have done their own studies and found this. So references are very important for substantiating claims that researchers make. And the other way of substantiating claims is through your empirical data. So you make claims of what you found in the data, and you might include a statistical analysis, a graph, a photograph of a sample, some data quotes. There are many ways in which you can refer to your data to substantiate the findings that you claim were in your study. So you make a claim and you substantiate that claim with evidence. So this exercise that I am strongly recommending you find an hour or two to do, even though it might feel tedious as you're doing it, I assure you it will pay dividends, is what I call the 2 highlighters exercise. I call it the 2 highlighters exercise because often we actually do it with a hard copy of an article and literally take 2 highlighters, a pink highlighter, yellow highlighter, whatever. You have 2 different color highlighters and you highlight on the actual article. Of course, in this day and age, it can be on the screen and you can highlight using the technology. But basically what you do is every time the author claims something, in other words, every time the author states something as true or as a fact, use your one color. So let's say pink. Every time the author makes a claim, says something as a fact, color that pink. And then you start asking yourself, says who? On what basis should I believe this pink highlighted claim? Why should I believe what the author is stating? And have a look for what evidence they are providing. And highlight the evidence in a different color. So let's say you highlight the claim in pink, you highlight the evidence in yellow. On what basis are they asking their reader to believe what they are stating? And then I've got there in that very small writing on the right-hand side, either there will be no evidence, which is when the claim is absolutely accepted in the field. You don't need evidence. We all know this is true. Or they might give a reference to say, other people have done studies on this. It's very credible, peer-reviewed research, literature. Here's some references that supports the claim I'm making. Or this is what I found. Here's a graph, a statistic, a picture, a data quote to show you that what I'm stating I found is actually found in what I did. So that is the two highlighters activity. And I'm going to quickly have an example of what that might look like with this journal article in front of us, the same one I was looking at earlier, perceptions of cervical cancer patients on their financial challenges in Western Kenya. Now, different disciplines have different ways of referencing, different styles of referencing. Some use Harvard, some use APA. In this one, you can see the references are these little numbers. Let me see if I can try and point to it. These little numbers here. These are the references. So you would have to go to the reference list at the end and find what they are. But let's just have a quick look at this example. Let's have a look here. They say, moreover, it can also trigger non-financial consequences such as financial stress, leading to psychological problems. Really? It can lead to financial stress, which can lead to psychological problems? Oh, I'm not so sure about that. Your study didn't even look at that. You haven't got data to support that. Oh, hang on. You say here, references to 11 and 14. Let me go and look at those references, because clearly those references do provide the evidence for that. Oh, okay. I can believe you then. Yes. Let's have a look at this next one. In the US, more than 2 million cancer survivors did not get one or more needed medical services because of financial challenges. And this was mainly amongst Hispanic and Black survivors. I'm not so sure. Can it be that many? 2 million? And is it that racially divided, that it's mostly Hispanics and Black survivors? I'm not sure. Oh, hang on. Number 15. If I don't believe this claim that this author is saying, I should go to number 15, and that will provide me with the evidence for what is being claimed here. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm literally highlighting in one the claim and highlighting in other the evidence. And if you do that in your own articles with 2 or 3 articles, you'll start to see the ways in which references to peer-reviewed literature is a means of making sure that the author's claims are taken seriously. They are believable. And that's why the literature you reference in your own writing needs to be credible literature. There's nothing wrong with reading Wikipedia. I'm a big believer. I use it all the time. I think it's a fabulous example of citizen science. There's nothing wrong with reading news stories on your topic. You should be reading news stories on your topic. You can reference in your academic writing to Wikipedia and to news stories and to websites. And there are often very good reasons and specific reasons for doing so. But generally speaking, I wouldn't use those as my references, because I want to make sure that my readers, when they see what I'm claiming, they go, oh, where's her evidence? Wow, that's really strong evidence. Those are really good. Those are not rubbishy, predatory publications. Those are strong publications and strong journals. And she's really using those to substantiate her claims. And it's credible. So that's why we choose our references in terms of really strong, rigorous, peer-reviewed journal articles to substantiate our claims, because when we reference, the main reason we reference is to make sure our readers take our claims seriously. There are many other reasons why we reference, but one of the main reasons is because we want to use references to substantiate what we are saying as writers. And so I would strongly recommend that you do this. I want to quickly stop for a moment and have a look, at what's happening in the chat, and to see if there's any questions or comments about this activity that I'm really hoping I've convinced you all to spend a bit of time doing. The 2-highlighter activity: highlight every claim the author makes and then highlight all the evidence. Portia's saying intermittent referencing disrupts your reading flow. Do I have to stop reading the text and refer to the referenced article, or do I skip the references? It really depends on what you're reading for, Portia. I think, if I'm just reading for meaning, which is what I normally do, to kind of figure out, what's this article all about? What can I learn about it? Is it useful for my study? Is there something in this that will be important to reference in my study? Well, then I wouldn't bother going to the references. I would just read from beginning to end. But if I read a claim and I think, whoa, I'm not so sure about that, then I might go and look at the reference, and I might even go and open those references and read those references. I don't generally go back and forth. I generally don't even read them. But taking note of the references is an important job to do as you're cracking the code of academic reading and writing in your field, because you should start to notice whether there are key names of researchers that come up time and time again, because maybe if there's someone that a lot of people that you're reading are referring to, you better go and read that person in the original. You also start to notice what journals get referenced over and over again. If the same journals are coming up in the reference list over and over again on your topic, you should probably go into that specific journal and look through the journal for more articles on your topic. And also just to start getting a feel of the schools of thought, especially in more contentious fields where there are very different schools of thought. You might start to get a sense, oh, these guys all kind of take a particular theoretical or ideological position, which is somewhat different to these other guys. So you start to notice which names kind of go together. But don't get too hung up on that, because that kind of happens as you read and read and read more in your field and keep your reading journal. You'll start to make sense of these things. Ingrid says, if the reference sounds like one I want to follow up on, I write the reference in my research journal to look up later, but continue writing so I get the full picture, continue reading and writing to get the full picture. Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point, is that often I find readings because someone's referenced that article in relation to a claim that that other person is making. Then I think, oh, hang on, I should go and read that. How far back in years can one reference? Very nice question. Thanks, Portia. And of course, the answer is the same as the answer to any other question. It depends. It depends on your field. In some fields, and IT and people researching AI in particular, really you don't want to be referenced. You probably need to reference the last year, maybe the last 6 months, maybe the last 3 months. In other fields, for example, history, you're going to be referencing articles from however long back you want to, a few hundred years if necessary. So it depends on your issue, your topic. Typically, and this is very much a rule of thumb, which is going to vary greatly across fields, but typically I would say you don't want to be referencing something older than 10 years old. Again, that varies so much by field. In some fields, 20 years is fine. In some fields, like computers, anything more than 2 years is probably out of date. But I would suggest that the middle line is somewhere like 10 years. But having said that, not only does it differ by field, it differs by reference. I still reference Paulo Freire. I reference John Dewey. I reference seminal texts which remain pertinent to my field years, decades, if not 100 years after the person has died, because that reference is still current. But you don't want to have old references when you think about the work that these references are doing on the screen right now. These references are telling the reader, take my claim seriously. This is the literature that backs it up. So if you have, this is the literature that backs it up, but it's all from 50 years ago, and it's not seminal text. These are arbitrary articles that no one really has been reading or citing. They're just articles that I happen to find or that I read 100 years, 20 years ago. Well, then that's not going to substantiate your claim well, because you're referencing things to say to your reader, this claim is serious, take it seriously, it's credible. this is the most up-to-date, high credibility references that provide the evidence for this. So I wouldn't be referencing older texts unless they are still very current in terms of their credibility in the field. If your article is full of references to arbitrary articles from 25 years ago, I will probably, as the reader, get the sense that you are out of touch with the conversations in the field. Remember, a journal article and any academic writing makes a contribution at the frontiers of the field. So you need to know where are the frontiers of the field. What are the current methodologies, the current theories, the current concepts, the current arguments? You only know that if you're up to date with the current literature. But there may be good reason for you to reference a very old article. That's fine, but do it by choice and not simply because you haven't kept up to date with the literature in your field. So Deborah asks, the referencing style that we use, Harvard or APA. I think that it's very much up to you and your field. For me, my only rule is be consistent. Pick a style and stick with it. And in this day and age, the software can do it for you, whether you're using Zotero or Mendeley or EndNote or RefWorks or whatever you're using. I recommend, if you're planning to do a master's or PhD or becoming an academic, it's worth investing the time to learn that software rather than doing this manually. I know that there are a couple of our librarian staff in the room. I can see Debbie. I'm trying to see who else is here. I wonder if one of them can say, does Rhodes, I know Rhodes is very open. Use whatever referencing style is appropriate to your study, appropriate to your field. Just use it consistently. But does the university, oh, and Sue's also here, does the university recommend a style for someone who really doesn't have any particular preference? I wonder if anyone in the library can answer that question. I seem to think it's APA, but I'm not 100% sure.
Hi, Sue. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, it's Debbie speaking, Debbie Martindale. I don't know if there's a specific one, but I think the more common reference style that's used across campus is the Harvard Ruskin one, the Anglia-Ruskin, Harvard.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that.
And then also there's APA, and that's another general one.
That's also quite a common one. I know my students definitely seem to move between those two. But then, of course, you also need to think about what's pertinent in your field. So law has its own referencing style, and some other fields have very specific referencing style. So you may as well get to know them now. But as I say, if you expend the energy to learn how to use one of the citation software, it's a bit of a learning curve. It's very, very frustrating and annoying in the beginning. But I think it's worth investing the time, especially those of you who plan to really go on, as I say, to PhD level or to continue with an academic career. I think it's worth investing the time because that allows you to change referencing style more or less at the press of a button. I say more or less because there'll always be one or two references that you have to go and fix up. But it's definitely worth learning how to do that. Thanks, Debbie. Let's move along. Any other questions or comments? Is everything clear about this suggestion that this two highlighting suggestion to start to crack the code of how claims are made by authors in your field, by researchers in your field, and how they have to provide evidence for any claim that isn't kind of absolutely accepted within the field. And that claim, that evidence will be in the form of referencing or in the form of the data, the findings from the actual study. Okay, thanks, Mhlali. APA for education. Anyone else want to ask any questions about these two highlighter exercise? Yeah, Ingrid's making a point about having to use the referencing style of the journal that if you're writing for a journal, you have to use their referencing style. You don't want to be rejected before anyone's even read your article because you didn't get it in the format and the style that they want. Okay, I'm going to move along. But if you have any other questions about this exercise, then, oh my word, I'm so over time as usual. Please, please, you can always just drop me an email as well. Right, let me rush along. Right, so you've figured out how to crack the code of how arguments are built through a chain of claims and evidence, which slowly builds up to the central argument of the article. So the next activity, which I'm hoping you will do in your own time, is to now look at the article as a whole and to say, what is the main argument? What is it that I am meant to take away as the take-home message? Now, of course, when you read an article for meaning, you will learn a whole lot of stuff that might not be the main argument. You might learn a bit about the methodology. You might find how the theory is used interesting. You might learn about a new piece of literature. All of those things are things that you learn from reading, and reading is absolutely fundamental to postgraduate studies. But that the main message should ideally actually be just able to be stated in one sentence. That main message is the purpose of the entire article. So the whole article is this chain of claims and evidence, which builds up through subsection and subsection, paragraph, paragraph, sentence, sentence, builds a convincing argument to make sure that your reader believes the position you have taken. So it's what I'd like you to do is to identify in your 2 or 3 articles, what is that main contribution? What is that main argument? And maybe take a third highlighter color and highlight that main argument. And you will see that that argument is stated in a few places in different words, often to try and keep it more interesting so you're not repeating sentences. But as we've already said, typically the abstract, often at the end of the abstract, makes clear this is the main argument, this is the main contribution. Often it's restated in the introduction, so it kind of tells the reader, in this article, I'm going to show you that X, Y equals Z, whatever. Then the body is the claims and evidence that builds it. And then again, in the conclusion, it'll often reiterate, this is what I want you to know, or this is the implications of what this article has shown. So you might want to get a third color highlighter and see if you can clearly identify what is the argument. And that'll help you not only with reading in your field, but again, with writing. Another last activity that you can do then is, once you've done all of this, you've analyzed the introduction, you've analyzed the title, the structure of the abstract, the introduction, you've looked for the claims and evidence, you've identified the argument, is that you might actually now want to draw a mind map of that whole argument, of that whole article. Put the title in the middle, and underneath that, put the argument, and then draw some little sparks and tell us what went into the introduction, what were the main points, what went into the literature review, what went into the methods, and you'll see how they've structured that whole article to make the one argument through all these different steps. And by drawing a mind map, deconstructing the article that you're reading into a mind map, it might also help you when you're crafting your own articles to think, well, what is my one argument? What will the subsections I need to do? And it might then be worth you mind mapping your own potential future article. And then finally, have a look at your reference lists. I think we already said that. Start to look at the reference lists of the articles you're reading. Have a look at, are there names that come up time and time again? Are there particular journals or publishers that come up time and time again? Because maybe you need to really expend a bit more energy seeking them out and get to understand the citation styles required in your field or by that particular article, that particular journal. And that is that. A rather rushed look at an activity that, if you do it properly, will actually take you a few hours. And I'm hoping that I've convinced some of you to expend those hours, because I genuinely believe that this meta-level analysis of journal articles will help you in future reading. You only have to do it once, or maybe you do it in a few months' time again, but it'll help you as you're reading for meaning to get a sense of how journal articles are structured. It'll help you to read a bit better, and it'll definitely help you for those of you who want to go on and publish from your research. So I'm going to stop there. and see if there's any more questions or activities, or I will, and please put your hand up, put questions in the chat bar. And while you do that, I just want to remind you that Olwetu has put a link to the evaluation in the chat bar. Usually only about 4 or 5 people in every workshop fill in the evaluation. And I know it's a bit of a pain, you want to get on with your evening, but these evaluations are really, really important for us to make sure that we are doing what you need. And it also includes a space for you to recommend other workshops that you might want. Please follow the link to that evaluation. And if you haven't yet self-enrolled to the Are You Connected course on the orientation program, which is running this whole month, please do so. There's lots more materials that you can work through on your own. Tanesha asked me to repeat the mind mapping. So the mind mapping is kind of try and turn this article into a mind map. By the way, AI can do this for you. You can ask, including ChatGPT-4, but you can ask various AIs. You can upload the article and Elicit will also do it and say, please provide a mind map of this article. And it'll kind of take the subheadings and the content and sort of give you a mind map to understand what came first, what came second, what went under each section. I find that a particular useful activity when I'm going to be the writer of an article. I often make clear to myself, what is the argument? What is my main contribution? And I try and get that very clearly expressed in a sentence. Then I try and mind map, draw a kind of picture of, I put the argument in the middle of a circle, and then I think, well, what subsections will I need? What will I need to explain? What shall I put first, second? And I draw lots of scribbling arrows, and I try and sort of draw a picture for myself of what my article is going to look like. Then I start my messy writing. And I start with I don't start with the introduction. I come back to that later, and I start trying to move from my mind map picture of what I think it's going to look like to actually writing it. Often it doesn't end up looking at all what my mind map looked like, because it's through the writing that you start to figure out exactly what will make the most sense. And it's a draft after a draft after a draft. And in the orientation program, there's a video called Just Right. Just Right. And I urge you all to look for that video as well. So I've already said to you, look for the video on reading, keeping a reading journal. I'm now suggesting that you also look on that Are You Connected site for Just Right. Is that that video, not article, sorry, that video called Just Right is all about the writing process. And one of the things that is stressed in that video is you can't sit down and write a beautiful academic text. You have to give yourself permission to sit down and write a really crappy academic text, because it's only through writing kind of incoherent, all over the place stuff that you can start to ask yourself, hang on, does this make sense? Maybe I need to explain this first. This is rubbish. Start again, redraft it, move things around, tighten it up. Fine, go back and look at your literature to substantiate a claim. If you tell yourself that you need to sit down and do beautiful academic writing, you will paralyze yourself. I speak as someone who's done a lot of academic writing in my time. Give yourself permission to write badly and then rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. So many of my own students paralyze themselves by trying to write beautiful, clear academic writing from their very first draft, and they write a sentence and they edit that sentence, they correct their spelling, they correct their grammar, they rewrite it, and then at the end of the day, they spent all day working on one sentence or one paragraph. Just get it down, and then you can make it beautiful. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for staying with me, and we look forward to seeing you again lunchtime tomorrow, when we're going to be talking about ethics and a little bit about the role of AI, artificial intelligence in ethics. Really appreciate your company. Bye, everyone.